I've always enjoyed naval aircraft. In fact, War Thunder has a plethora of just floaty boaties and just weird and wacky aircraft that I really think that should be in the regular tech trees. Case in point, when we're looking at stuff like, for example, shipboard reconnaissance aircraft as an additional vehicle available for aircraft, so say naval vessels, there are a few vehicles which can be accessed: the OS2U1 Kingfisher, the Arado 193, and the F1M2. But for the most part, outside of a couple of vehicles, these things are just kind of a unique oddity that War Thunder really could use from. I mean, just look at this thing. This is a Walrus Mark 1 used over the British Empire. It's butter running 1.0. It's got a top speed of about 393 kilometers an hour. Armor, there is no armor protection. It's got 3 crew members and an oil cooling system on the front with a Rolls-Royce Kestrel engine, which is a 9-cylinder. But I'd really appreciate it if you actually subscribe to the channel, because we are aiming for 100,000 by the end of this year. Anyway, back to the wonderful Walrus Mark 1. It's armed with 4 250-pound bombs, which is the biggest out of any of the seaplanes that I feature in this video. And I just think it's really, really unique. It is a real shame that you can't access them. You have to grind through a naval in order to unlock some of the vehicles, and, well, the only one I actually have access to is a Japanese one, which we'll see in a minute. But War Thunder has really strange vehicles. Like, they allow the Po-2 to be in-game, which essentially is just a light bomber which, you know, has a rear gunner, and it doesn't have floats. It's not as interesting. There was a float version of the Po-2, so maybe we'll have that in the future, but goodness me, the Osprey Mark 1, or Mark 4, should I say, looks exactly like some of those early Nimrod fighters that you find in the early tech tree, except this has gunners, and it has floats, and it has an 8mm steel bucket, as well as just a whole host of interesting features. Well, what interesting features? Well, a biplane, floats, you know, 2-bladed prop, it's early war, it's kind of unique, battle rating 1.0, you know, a forward-firing gun with 500 rounds, and then a rear turret with, you know, 485 rounds. So, pretty cool. And other than that, you don't get any bombs, and it's basically just a light fighter slash a reconnaissance aircraft. And it's just kind of really unique. I wish I could fly this thing in regular matches. The H-51, you know, with floats exists, so why can't we take this thing out for a bit of a spin? Now, I've already shown this one on the channel if you haven't seen my other hidden vehicles that, you know, Gaijin won't let us fly. This is the Japanese E7K2, rank 1.3, it's got a forward-firing gun, and... actually, sorry, it doesn't have a forward-firing gun. It has a single 7.7 as a turret in a dual mount, a rear and a top. Again, it's kind of a bit interesting. I just thought that this vehicle would be kind of cool. 60-kilogram bombs, the Japanese tend to really like those kind of things, and top speed of 390. Now, its brother is a bit interesting as well. You've got 7.7mm gun in the rear, no, like, below, but it's got this weird sort of dihedral wing, sort of Corsair vibe going on. And, well, its top speed is about 389 kilometers an hour. Again, 60-kilogram bombs times 2. Your top speed is right there on the screen, and it's just a cool little hydroplane. Again, these do have the ability to drop smoke, they can also drop bombs, and they can also spot targets, but relatively, well, I wouldn't say they're kind of useful in naval. Again, a 9-cylinder engine with, you know, double wing spars, it's biplane after all. It's not as interesting as this. This is one of the newer ones, added in a recent update. I think it was in Winged Lion, so some point in the last couple of years. This is the Aichi E13A1, and this is the only vehicle we'll be able to test fly. But essentially, what you get is 3 crew, 1 gunner, and a 14-cylinder radial air-cooled engine with 4 non-self-sealing fuel tanks. And there is obviously a defensive armament in the back there. This thing doesn't really get a lot of explosives, so it gets 4 60-kilogram bombs, and there is a single turret. Top speed of 392 kilometers an hour. It flies pretty well. We'll go over that in a minute. Again, another really wacky scout aircraft that could be in the game. Again, why does the Po-2 exist? You know, stuff like that, when we could easily have these as a random vehicle. I know they did introduce the float Po-2 recently. I actually forgot about that one. But this is the most ugly thing I have ever laid my eyes on. The French are some very wacky, interesting designers, and this was meant to fulfill several different naval and air designations at the time. It's supposed to be search and rescue. It's supposed to have, you know, anti-submarine and anti-ship things. It's supposed to be a spotting aircraft and all sorts of things. It's basically a big box. And when you've got a V12 that's just an inline on the top there, and the pilot actually sits on the glass house directly below the engine air intake, and the gunner sits at the very, very front there. There is a pilot position in the front, which I want to call the wheelhouse because it's just such a big boat-looking thing. But the rear gunner doesn't really have much to sort of shoot at here. It's one of those random vehicles that, I don't know if the French really thought about what they were actually doing here, because, yeah, the rear gunner doesn't really have much of an elevation to really shoot at when you have a massive tri-rudder like that. And the rear stabilizers just look absolutely useless. Again, I can't test fly this thing. I don't own some of the French ships. The whole idea of this video was actually to test fly them and show you what they felt like, but the only vehicle I have access to is the newer Japanese one, because I have the Congo battleship. Now, in my last video where I talked about these hidden vehicles, this was one of them. This is the SOC-1. And America's naval premise at the time was a little outdated, and so they wanted to have a better scout aircraft, which led to the Kingfisher. But in the meantime, they had the Seagull, which is this thing. You know, you've got a Browning machine gun up front, a 7.62 with 500 rounds. You've got a radial 9-cylinder engine providing enough power for 3 floats. And you've also got a rear gunner as well, and 2 100-pound bombs. It's quite the fascinating machine. Again, 1.3 battle rating, and yeah, there you go. There's a look at the bombs there quickly. Top speed is 276 kilometers an hour, so not great, but for the time when you're dealing with, you know, 1930s naval technology, this would have been the spotter aircraft that did most of the hard yards. And so relaying information back to a ship is, well, really quite critical to the mission and allowing you to really help the battleships and various things have actual functionality. Now, the Italians did something similar. They turned a racing aircraft into what is here, the Row 43. We have the 44 in game. It's in the tech tree. It's a non-turreted version with a streamlined back, and I'll show that in a second. But this version essentially just houses a rear gunner with dual set of controls. Very, very similar setup, except it has less armament comparatively to its tech tree variation, and it has 2 7.7mm guns, one in the rear and one at the front. And yeah, there's top speed, 388 kilometers an hour, which isn't exactly great, but for the time, you know, it was 1930s technology. Here's the regular vehicle, which has 12.7 Breda machine gun times 2. Yeah, it significantly outweighs this other machine, but it's such a shame that we can't really use these vehicles in regular tech trees. I'd love to be able to fly out in another floats event if they ever put that back on. You know, recently they did Guardian Angel event with the B-17s, and that was so much fun. If they go and put the floats back, I'd love to go, you know, have a finick around and have a bit of a frolic. Just playing around with the float aircraft again. Speaking of playing around with float aircraft, we're going to take out the Japanese AEG. Once we actually get it off the ship, just basically the closest you'll get to actually seeing boat gameplay from me, although occasionally we do put out a video every now and then, basically on aviation and its counterpart with Naval. I feel like Naval as a game mode is misunderstood. It's really something that I don't really enjoy. I've never really been one for enjoying Naval sort of gameplay. It is fun to play when you're playing it, but it is dry as watching paint if you're going to watch content of Naval gameplay. So unless you're particularly entertaining, there is no real reason for you to sort of, you know, play Naval unless that's what you're into. Granted, I'm in it because if aircraft carriers ever get introduced at some point, I'd love to be able to be that kind of support player, or even, you know, just have a bunch of fun with a bunch of, you know, aircraft. Let's see what this Catalina's up to. Again, this thing flies a bit funky. Oh, okay. Well, that's all the gameplay we have time for. A very, very fitting aircraft. I think it's coming in right now. Hold on. There it is. Beautiful. Touchdown. Look, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate you checking this video out. Hopefully you enjoyed a little short look at some of the naval vehicles you can't necessarily get access to in the regular air trees. We all love float planes. thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one soon. Bye-bye.